All right, Commission Chair Dean, we are ready.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and at this time, if we can all stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
to the flag
of
of
the
the United States of
America.
America,
America,
to the republic
for which is
for which it stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and
and
justice for all.
justice for all. Thank you very much. Kristen, you could call roll call, please.
Bruce Angel,
Yep.
Mike Thomas,
Here.
Tim Dean,
Here.
Dan Berg,
Here.
and Yvonne Van Ornum.
Here.
Thank you very much. Before we approve the agenda, the chair would like to request an adjustment. We do kind of have a little bit of a lengthy public hearing that I would rather do after the presentation from the workshop and Project Roxy. So the chair's requesting that we switch items number 1 and items number 2.
I move that we approve the adjusted agenda with the Roxy design review first and the draft planned action environmental impact statement second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 So that approves the agenda for this evening. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to staff for our workshop item. And please understand these are discussion items for tonight. So
Project Roxy, the applicant Panattoni Development, is proposing to construct a single 100-foot tall industrial building and related auxiliary structures consisting of approximately 2.82 million square feet on approximately 72 acres in the light industrial zone. The use of facility, a distribution center, is permitted in the light industrial zone, and the project falls within the Cascade Industrial Center. The applicant's project is anticipated to create over 1,000 new jobs consistent with the Cascade Industrial Center sub-area plan. Site improvements include approximately 1,250 parking stalls, 312 trailer parking stalls, 51 truck loading docks, and landscape improvements, utility improvements, including improved stormwater, sanitary sewer connection, domestic fire water connection, and loop around the site with other utility improvements to serve the building. The application was based off the submittal received September 30th, 2020. Based off that, staff has provided these conditions. Buildings should not orient large areas of blank walls to the street. Ends of buildings shall be designed and articulated with windows and other architectural elements, incorporating artwork on the wall surface or incorporating decorative tile or masonry of varying materials or patterns. Provide clear pedestrian entries from the street and not just from adjacent parking areas. Compose architectural elements to add interest to the building facade. Use modulation and articulation and clear rhythm to reduce the perceived size of all large buildings. In general, buildings should be divided and given human scale by using articulation and or modulation at 40 to 50 foot intervals, providing either a step back or extending forward a portion of facade at least 6 feet for each interval, or B, fenestration patterns that repeat at intervals at least equal to the articulation interval. No buildings may have large areas of blank wall surfaces. Use architectural features and other elements to enhance all building faces. Based off of this, staff is recommending that revisions are made prior to design review board approving the design review application for Project Roxy PLN 757.
thank you. I think before we move into discussion, we have a gentleman here from Panattoni, and would you like to present anything this evening?
I think probably that would be myself. I'm Allison Hoagland. I'm the architect for Project Roxy. And I just wanted to first thank you all for the opportunity to do a brief presentation this evening. I will try to make it brief and not take up too much of the time. I know that you guys have a busy evening on the docket. So since we submitted the documentation that you see in front of you, we have been further developing the design and also reviewing the Arlington Development Guidelines and really further enhancing some images and presentation items that I wanted to share with you today to further express how our team feels that we are meeting the intent of the Arlington Development Guidelines. So if it's okay, I would share my screen. I believe that I have the ability to do that. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So the first, you know, when we're looking at the development guidelines, we really feel like it's important to note that the Arlington Development Guidelines standards were written not necessarily with the scale of building that we are proposing in mind. And so when we look at it as a whole, the design guidelines and standards as a whole, there's multiple different items within there that is our goal to meet with the design of the project. It's really important to look at both at the project with two different scales in mind, kind of the human articulation scale where a human or an individual when it would interact with the building at, you know, a human level. And then also from a distance or from a further away perspective where you're really interacting with the building and noticing it in its whole and entirety as a complete composition. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about the human scale. And we've really spent a lot of time working on the human scale and articulation of the project. You can see in the next two perspective images, I've taken away a lot of the landscaping and other items that would preclude you from being able to see the building elevation here in these next few slides so that we can really look at how the building's addressing some of these items that are in your standards or guidelines. So as you can see, as you approach a building, we have multiple areas where the elevation is stepping back, providing that kind of smaller scale articulation, as well as fenestration throughout the elevation where there is an office related use. And this helps provide that transparency, human level articulation to the building. We also have entry areas that have been well defined and articulated to help draw the individual to the appropriate entry for the building. We also are working with different patterns, textures, and materials within this portion of the facade. So as you approach, you can see that the building is very articulated at the human scale, both with different depths and steps within that articulation, as well as fenestration and human scaled elements. You can also see here that some of the larger scale articulation that's happening is also helping with that human scale as you approach a building. You can see that at the top of the building, from a human scale perspective, you're really seeing large steps in the elevation and large variation within the parapet and roof line of the structure overall. So, you know, as relates to human scale and articulation, we really do feel that the project meets the intent of the development guidelines of the City of Arlington. As we step away from the human scale, it's important to understand and look at the project as a cohesive whole. The design guidelines talk a lot about balance of an overall elevation, as well as architectural character of the building. It also speaks towards the building being expressive of the use. And as this is an industrial area, the project has been designed carefully with that carefully in mind to both allow there to be a lot of architectural character to an industrial building, but as well as stay true to what the building use is. So as you step away from the building, the scale of this project speaks towards wanting the articulation to change in scale. And that provides more depth to the elevation as well as perceived articulation from a distance when you look at the elevation as a whole. So I put together a few quick diagrams that kind of help illustrate this. So this is a less refined image. It's more of a diagram. And so up here in the left-hand corner, you'll see kind of a bird's eye view diagram of the roof plan. You can see all the different areas of roof lines and planes that we have in the elevation or in the building overall. So there's quite a bit of articulation, and both from a horizontal and step perspective in the building overall, as well as different roof heights and variances throughout the building. Right next to it is a quick example of if we just were to look at the design guidelines or standards and at a smaller scale building that they were likely written for. And this shows the 40 to 50 foot steps in elevation within a recess about 6 feet for 15 feet or so. What you can see there from a mathematical perspective is that it's essentially a 3-to-1 ratio in the articulation pattern. So below this, you can see if we were to take that same pattern and extrapolate it across the length of the full front facade as well as at the height of the building. And you can see if we do that at the scale of building that is proposed, that it really the articulation starts to flatten out and starts to look much more like a flat facade. So what we've done in order to provide more depth and character to the building and articulation is to take that same 3-to-1 ratio and apply it at the larger scale. So we have much larger steps in our elevation, as well as both in length along the facade that the articulation happens, as well as depth and step. So that as you move away from the building and as the building is looked at as a whole, it really starts to break up that facade instead of reading as one plane. In addition to the large moves that we have in articulation with the steps and planes of elevations varying, we also have really done a lot with the materiality of the elevation. So on the lower levels of the building, we have a heavier material that is concrete with multiple different patterns and textures on that portion of the building facade. And then as you move your way up the building lightens up, and we use an architectural metal panel in multiple different patterns and textures in order to provide that same level of articulation and detail throughout the elevation. Our areas of fenestration on the upper portion of the building are where there are functions related to those windows. So again, expressing the inward character of the building on the exterior of the building, which is part of the architectural character portion of your design guidelines. So again, in summary, we really do feel that we are meeting the intent of the Arlington design guidelines with the design of this building, understanding that there are interpretations that are needed to be made when we look at a building of this scale. And so with that, I will turn it back over to the board.
Thank you very much. I think at this time, if anybody has any questions for Ms. Hoagland, I think that we would like to turn that over to the commissioners for their questions. Can we go ahead and do this as we typically do and kind of go through each one of you to see if you have any questions or comments? So can I start with you, Jan? Do you have any questions or comments for Ms. Hoagland?
Not at this time.
Okay. Then next would be Mike. Do you have any questions?
Well, the orientation to 172nd, like we discussed before, I thought that the buildings were going to be up against the roadway instead of out in the middle. But I don't know if that changed because it's now light industrial instead of general commercial. That's a question for Mark, I guess. That's my question.
Okay.
So I'll address that, Mike. We looked at the building, we looked at the operation of the building and how it would function and the mass of the building itself. And so as part of this, this discussion, the operation of the building would not function if that parking were placed anywhere else on the site because of the truck traffic and the truck bays to the rear of the building. There wouldn't be enough room to accommodate the small passenger vehicle parking. And then in respect to the massing of the building, if we were to pull a 100-foot building out to the right of way, like we do with all of our smaller industrial buildings, it would be daunting. I mean, it would be just
Oh, yeah.
overwhelming experience for anybody going by this. And so part of that discussion was that, okay, how do we do this? How do we screen the parking? Because we do allow for screened parking in front of the buildings, just like we do in any other industrial building. And so by doing the 5-foot-high landscaping berm, it really addresses that. So there will be a process we have to go through in order to approve this, but conceptually, you know, we believe, at least staff believes, that this is the best way to approach this for those two reasons, for both the screening of the parking in front of the building and just the mass of the building itself.
Okay, I just wanted to bring it up, but yeah, I understand everything you said.
Thank you.
All right. And then Yvonne, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
You are? Okay. Bruce, did you have any questions or comments this evening?
Yeah, just more of a comment, I guess, that it's a little difficult to wrap your mind around the size of this building compared to other buildings in the city. And when I visualize a building almost 100 feet tall and these walls above the first level, there's still a lot of blank wall. And I'm not suggesting an alternative, but I just don't think that where we are now completely addresses that issue, particularly regarding the design standards. And while I agree that the standards aren't perhaps anticipating a building of this magnitude, we still have to deal with the concept and to include it in a walkable, visually appealing way. And I just still see a lot of blank wall.
Right, understood. So I think, you know, that's one of the reasons why we put together this image previous to the one that we were just looking at is, again, at the human scale where an individual is going to be interacting with this building, you're not going to perceive the larger spaces between the stepped elements on the upper portion of the building. And that's really because of the perspective that you'll be viewing the building at. So when you're stepping further away, those portions that you're referring to in the elevation actually play an important role because it helps break up the facade from from the whole when you see those larger elements coming out from it. So when you're further away from the building, the rate of speed that you're traveling past the building at, as well as your perspective view is going to be very different from when you're right up next to the building. And so again, a human scale versus overall scale are two important ways to kind of look at the project and understand it.
Sorry, can I ask a question? I have
Sure.
one. Just to make sure I'm looking at this correctly, the picture you have up right now is what is being seen from the parking lot, but that's not what's being seen from 172nd.
Right. So from 172nd, you will be
It's drawing
seeing,
4.
let's see, I have the design review package here. From the street, you're going to mostly be seeing the landscape elements that are put in place, which was the reason for the 5-foot berm and the amount of trees and landscaping that are being proposed.
Oh, thank you.
So Bruce, I didn't know if you were finished yet or not, so.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bruce.
That's all right.
No, that's all right. Now, I just, again, trying to visualize, having driven up and down that section, trying to visualize a 100-foot building, I'm not sure I agree that landscaping, at least in our lifetime, is going to, because you talk about human scale, and I agree with you as far as how it appears and feels when you're in the parking lot or approaching the building at that proximity. Across the street, I still don't see, that. And most people will interact with this building, walking along the sidewalk, driving, that the bulk of our citizens aren't going to see the building from the parking lot.
Right, understood. I think, you know, again, from a distance perspective, it was the goal to make large moves in the articulation to break up the mass overall. And if we start to do that at a smaller scale, it won't have the same impact to the project overall. So that was the reason for utilizing the same 3-to-1 ratio that's in the design guidelines to apply to the project overall and try and make some bigger articulation steps to help break down that elevation.
Thank you. I do understand what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then I guess I'll move on to myself. Can you tell me basically about the height, not exactly the height of the office area, if you want to take us back to that elevation there, what is about the height of that first elevation before we get to the main building?
Oh, now you're going to ask me the hard questions, huh?
The 30 feet, 40 feet, you know?
Yeah, it's probably about 2 stories. So between
About
40 and 50 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, and I think the articulation on this portion of it is fantastic. This is exactly what I feel we are looking for. And then when we look at the other 50 feet from where we're standing today, right here, then it doesn't seem overwhelming or daunting. It just seems, you know, like I'm on my way into work. And again, I want to kind of piggyback on what Commissioner Bruce said, was that most of the people, if not, are not going to be viewing this building from this perspective. My understanding is they're going to be viewing it from the street or the sidewalk. The other thing was that, could you explain to me what type of articulation might be going along the east and the west elevations? Because when I look at those, I kind of feel as though we're not seeing the same thought process as we are seeing here. When I look at those, which those will still be exposed to, 51st and then also other streets, they do look like incredibly large blank walls. And it is, now, just to get an understanding, and I think that we've already mentioned this to the commissioners before, that if we were to take the the distribution center, which is just to the east of this, is about 50 feet high. So Crown Distributing. So if we were to go and just imagine that building twice as high, and then imagine it, about 4 times, if not 5 times as long. So what I'm looking at is that when I'm looking at, the elevations right now on my screen, I do see some articulations at each corner, but I don't see much of anything in between.
Right.
And they're huge. I mean, if you can give me just an idea here, how many feet between each corner of those on the west and the east elevations?
Right. So you can see, in the diagram here, we have similar elements on each portion, all sides of the facade that are kind of a lower portion element. So if I go to so this is a blown up portion of the back of the building, and you can start to see with the shadow here the articulation that is that comes along with the dock area, as well as the differences in the materiality, the turrets that we have in the corners. And then this element is stepped out from this element as well. You just don't see the shadow because of the way the sun is in this elevation. And that is consistent around all 4 sides of the building. So, these are elements that step out again and are lower. And these are large areas that are stepped out from each corner as well. So there is that similar quality to this with respect to as appropriate to the function that's inside the building.
Okay. I'm still having a challenge with that massive amount of wall. I mean, it is very different than anything we've seen or see here in the city. And one of the things that I brought up at our last meeting when we were first introduced to this was you're sort of challenged with the fact that this is the building that is at the gateway of one of the gateways to our city. And it can more than likely be seen from the freeway. And so with that in mind, I still feel as though we want it to look like something that is attractive, that has texture, that has, as opposed to, I don't want to bring up an example, but I just as a big warehouse building, because of the fact that we're here as an attractive piece to the gateway. And so we did actually have placed this same onus on another company who's building across the street from here. That, that is also one of the challenges we place in front of them, is that we want you to bring something to us that is going to be attractive, that is going to be a building that will represent our city as in a gateway. And I just, at this time, when I look at these elements, I just don't find that I'm feeling that.
I understand what you're saying. I think that, again, from a holistic standpoint, when we looked at the design guidelines and standards of the city, one of the things that really struck me was about architectural character and how that spoke towards the building expressing its use and function clearly, as well as creating an architectural character around that. And I would argue to say that, you know, I've designed quite a handful of industrial buildings. My firm has as well. We've been around for 60 years, and it's always been one of our mainstays. So we're very, very familiar with the project type. And I think, you know, this is, in my opinion, this is a very shining example of that project type and archetype in nature. And especially if you speak towards the architectural character that an industrial building wants to be, it goes far beyond that. And also, you know, really does make it a large effort to break down the overall mass, even though it is quite a large building. So I do hear your concerns and I understand them. I do think that this is a building that Arlington could be proud of. So.
Allison, I want to point out one thing here is that the reason we scrutinize this so highly is because the Cascade Industrial Center sits right in the middle of our residential zoning, which is dictated by a form-based code. And so for us to look at this building, we want to make sure that it's fairly seamless going from our mixed use neighborhoods through the Cascade Industrial Center back into our residential areas. And so that's why we're so concerned about a highly articulated building for that very reason. It's not only a gateway, but it sits right in the middle of our mixed use area. If this were in a strictly industrial setting where we didn't have that, I totally agree with that. But this is something that we're very cautious of, and like I said, every project that comes through, we have the same review process.
Sure.
So this is no different than any other building that we review and scrutinize to this degree. So just, you know, keep that in mind. This is very important to us. It's going to be here for a long time. And we want to make sure it's something that both the city and the client can be proud of here. So
I understand and I agree. I think it's important that this commission and the design review board is, you know, scrutinizes and does your job. That's why you're here, to serve the public. So I do understand and appreciate that. And thank you for explaining that, Mark. Appreciate it.
thank you.
All right. Any more questions or comments from commission?
I just had one question. Dr. talked about the site improvements, including the stormwater drainage, sewer and such. What about like the street improvement and frontage improvements? Where does that come in? Like the sidewalk, that type of thing?
That comes in. This is just design review, Jan. That
Okay.
all comes in with our site civil development review. And so we're
Okay.
going into that process right now. So those are all being addressed, and review comments are being sent to the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any more questions or comments? All right. I want to thank you, Ms. Hoagland, for coming by and spending some time with us and giving us a little more information about the building. And we're going to then move on to item number 2. And of course, Ms. Hoagland, you're welcome to stick around and listen to us go through our public hearing, but you don't necessarily have to, but I appreciate it.
I appreciate all of your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll move on to item number 2, which is going to be public hearing on the planned action environmental impact statement, the EIS.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know you've seen this PowerPoint before. There's a few slides that have been added to this, but I just want to reiterate the planned action here. So I'm going to go through this slide deck pretty quickly, and just to see if there's any questions that are generated and give you that opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's touchy. So this is, of course, the plan action EIS for our Cascade Industrial Center. So this is just the Arlington portion of the Cascade Industrial Center. Marysville, of course, is the other partner in this in the CIC. So, but we made the decision to do a planned action for our portion in order to help generate and expedite our development processes. And so that's the whole intent behind the EIS. So the study area, I think everyone is familiar with this. You know, we're looking at everything from 204th down to our boundary here with Marysville, 204th to the north. And this incorporates the Arlington Municipal Airport also. So previous to the plan coming forward, there were two things that were done. There was a market study that was completed in 2016. And then to build upon that was the actual Arlington Marysville Manufacturing Industrial Center sub-area plan, which was adopted in 2019. And so we were just building upon that information with this planned EIS. And as I inferred earlier, this is to put together all the impacts and evaluate what those impacts will be as development occurs within the CIC and how we can pre-plan for those impacts and figure out how the mitigation will work for development as it comes forward. It also gives us the ability to take a closer look at how we see the CIC developing out. And so that's identified through the action alternatives that you'll see further in the document here. Going through the process, just gives you a diagram of where we are. We've gone through with the analysis of the planned action area. We've created the planned action ordinance. Has not been adopted yet, and then we'll go through the development application process and then to our final SEPA and adoption of the final EIS document. Here we are today. We're coming through the draft EIS period. We will then move on to evaluate which preferred alternative that we will choose in order to create the document and move this forward for final approval and adoption. So the scoping period is what I referred to earlier. Scoping period was from April 8th to April 29th, 2020. This went out to all affected agencies to receive comments on that. Once we received that, we moved forward to the draft EIS, which is where we are currently. And of course, our vision of the CIC is to serve as a manufacturing industrial employment center with a diverse range of industrial activities that provide employment opportunities for residents in Snohomish County and the region. As part of that, we've looked at what industry clusters we see developing here and industry clusters that we would like to be able to build the CIC to harbor. So these are the draft EIS alternatives. So 3 alternatives. Number 1 is a no action alternative. So that just stays with our current comprehensive plan and zoning and no change to the current development atmosphere. Alternative 1 is the Cascade Center Vision job sectors. Alternative 2 is high growth. And so I'll go and show you which one of these, of the 3 choices here. So the no action alternative would continue the current comprehensive plan designation and zoning for the study area. No changes to the comprehensive plan to address added infrastructure, investments in the capital facility plan, or other amendments necessary to implement sub-area plan strategies for the CIC. So it's very much a status quo alternative. Alternative 1 is really, at this point in time, is our preferred alternative, simply because if you see what this allows, it allows us to both plan for job growth. It allows us to create training and educational facilities. It also allows us to do housing in close proximity to the job center. And so that's part of our plan that we've always had in our strategy. The 51st Avenue project will be an example of that, of our planning coming together with the CIC, where we have workforce housing in close proximity in order to provide for that multimodal transportation, so that an employee does not have to, or a resident does not have to get in their vehicle, drive the I-5 corridor in order to find gainful employment. The employment's being created here, and you really have the ability to walk, bike, or take some alternate means of transportation to get to your job. Alternative 2, the largest contrast with that is it does not allow for the training and educational facilities, nor does it allow for the housing element within the CIC. Here are some ranges of the alternative growth. I know that you had an opportunity to look at this at our presentation by Radhika Nair with Burke Consulting. So I won't go into detail on this. Here's where we evaluated the environmental conditions, and that was premised upon each one of the alternatives. Existing transportation facilities. So this is showing the non-motorized facilities, so trails and other connectivity for non-motorized transportation. Here's the transit corridor that currently exists. This will be expanded in order to incorporate routes that will come up 172nd and then down SR 531 to serve a larger community and the industrial area. One thing of importance is that the Smoky Point Boulevard will end up in 2028 with a rapid bus transit line established here. So you will have continual public transit that runs that route. So that will open up opportunity for the job center also. Here, the freight corridors are identified in and out of Arlington as a whole, but specifically to serve the CIC. So this goes on to describe what the impacts are for each one of the action alternatives. And I'll get to, here's the layout of the actual ordinance that has been created. So we do have a draft ordinance that is available if anyone would like to view that. Here are the impacts for peak hour vehicle trips premised upon each one of the action alternatives. You can see the increase from the no action up to alternative 2. So as I stated earlier, when you read the document, pay close attention to the action alternatives, and you'll probably find that action alternative number 1 really provides for the most holistic way to approach the development within the CIC. Mitigation measures. So they'll be following what's been shown within the document itself. As you read the document, shoulds equal shalls. And the topics that were covered were the natural environment, cultural resources, transportation, land use and aesthetics, public services, and utilities. Transportation requires SEPA mitigation fee based on demand for new development. So this actually generates the projects that will be impacted by growth within the CIC and establishes a mitigation fee and a pro rata basis for each development as it comes through to pay their fair share into the projects that have been identified. So these are the proposed comprehensive plan amendments. So chapter 8 of the comprehensive plan, the transportation element, here are the projects listed that will be subject to mitigation. So the SR 531 is a planned project through the state of Washington through connecting Washington. So this is between 43rd Avenue and 67th Avenue. This is known as the widening, which will go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. The date now, just to give you a little background, funding will be available in 2023. It will then go through the design 23 through 24, and construction most likely will be end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025. As long as revenue streams are still consistent, and the legislature releases that money. SR 531 between 67th Avenue and SR 9. So this is everything going up the hill from 67th Avenue. This has been a discussion point with all developments that have been occurring in the last 2 years. That's one of the major concerns of residents here is to have that street fully developed, that roadway segment fully developed up the hill in order to provide for adequate lanes and to provide for pedestrian connection. 67th Avenue and 180 Street Northeast. This is planned for traffic signal at that intersection and the railroad improvements leading into the intersection. So if anybody's been at this intersection, you know exactly how well this is warranted to have this project completed. And then the next project is the extension of 168th Street to 43rd Avenue. So this, if you remember, as part of one of the projects, Affinity, they built the easterly leg of that intersection at Smoky Point Boulevard and constructed the 168th alignment to the end of their project. From that point, there's a segment of the project that the city will have to construct that will go in behind Walmart and tie into 43rd Avenue. From 43rd Avenue to 51st, there are developments that are occurring there that it'll be development born, but that segment will be completed between 43rd and 51st. And then the next segment to be built would be the segment between 51st and 59th Avenue. So you'll have full connectivity all the way from Smoky Point Boulevard to 51st or 59th Avenue. And then the last project will be 63rd Avenue. Segments of this have been constructed already, but this will give you the north-south connector between 188th Street and 172nd. And then chapter 9, the capital facilities and public services element. So the one thing that we've really dwelled upon and made sure that it was in our draft EI or in the EIS itself is the relocation of Edgecombe Creek. If anybody's familiar with Edgecombe Creek, it is basically an agricultural ditch, but it is fish bearing, has vertical sides, so it doesn't create much of a habitat for any species. The relocation and widening of the Edgecombe Creek corridor will provide for all of that. It'll provide for rearing areas. It'll provide shading. It will provide this large corridor for both habitat and stormwater. As alongside this, there will also be a trail built along the corridor that will link from 172nd into Marysville through the CIC. So this is a very important element of the development in the CIC. And so as we move forward, that's is something of paramount importance to us. The next steps, pardon me, will be after the public hearing this evening. It will then go to Arlington City Council for review. Through review, we will decide on which action alternative to create the final EIS around. And then we'll go through the legislative process for council adoption. And so with that, I open it for any questions. One thing I do want to point out during this draft EIS process, we did receive comments from Washington State Department of Transportation. We will address those and incorporate the comments into the final EIS.
So I have one question on here, Mark, was, are we going to have any determination over which alternative is adopted, or do we make a suggestion as to which alternative, or is that something that's strictly determined by City Council?
No, that will be a conversation for Planning Commission, staff, and City Council. So we'll put this forward as the draft to council to comment on. They can make their own comments on which action alternative makes sense to them, but it will come from Planning Commission with a recommendation as to which alternative we use for the final EIS.
Okay. So I guess, again, I'm going to go ahead and go through everybody just to see if there's any questions or comments. So can we start with you, Jan? Any questions or comments on this?
No, I got most of mine answered last week, so appreciate that.
Okay. And then let's go to you, Yvonne. Did you have any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Okay. And then Mike, do you have any questions or comments on this one?
No, you asked the question I was going to ask.
Oh, perfect. Okay. And then Bruce, did you have any questions or comments on this at this time?
Do not, but I do have a motion.
Before we do that, I think I need to open it up for public comment.
Yep.
So at this time, I'd like to open the public hearing for public comment. And so I'll revert to staff to find out, do we have anybody in the public that's willing to comment at this time?
There's no public comment this evening.
Okay, that being said, then at this time, I'll close the portion of our public hearing for public comment, and then we can move forward from there.
Okay, time for the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
I move that Planning Commission recommend to council to move forward with the draft EIS statement as presented.
All right. Before we vote on that, is there any further discussion on it?
So I'm sorry, do we give a recommendation with this of which alternative that we propose, or does that come later?
That will come later, Jan.
Okay.
This is just to recommend moving the draft EIS to council for them to comment.
Okay, perfect.
Any further discussion? That was a good question, by the way. So with no further questions or comments, let's take a vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, then the ayes have it.
Commission Chair Dean, I actually didn't get a second. Can we please get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, all in favor? Aye.
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 All right. Thank you very much. So I think that concludes our public hearing today. So we will now end the public hearing for the draft of the Planned Action Environmental Impact Statement, EIS. And then at this point, I'm going to revert back to staff if there is any other public, I doubt that there is, but if there's any public comment on anything that is not on our agenda today.
There's no public comment.
Okay. And at that point, before I adjourn or request for a motion to adjourn, I want to make a comment that Yvonne wins the best background for everybody who's got their background here today. So just wanted to add a little levity for that. And thank you everyone for being here. So now Chair requests a motion for adjournment.
A motion to adjourn. Thank you.
Second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank
Aye.
you.
Thank you.
Send it.